The ingredient in the recipe for running success, which in my opinion is not discussed enough, is sleep. We can train relentlessly, clock up lots of weekly mileage, we can do hill runs, tempo runs, interval runs, our nutrition can be dialed down to a T, everything can be perfect, but if our sleep isn't good, we will never be able to reach our full potential as runners. In this video, I'll share some top tips for how you can maximize your sleep to have better training for your running and also to have better race days. Now, before we go any further, I need to obviously mention that I'm not a medical professional, I'm not a sleep scientist, I'm not a sleep psychologist, but I am someone who has experienced mild insomnia for quite a large number of years, and occasionally I have some really bad insomnia, which really sucks to say the least. And if you've experienced any sleep issues yourself, then you'll know how annoying it is when you just can't get that quality sleep that you need to function at your best. When I was experiencing my sleep issues, I really started to notice my running training performance was going down the pan, and I found it so hard to get to sleep and wake up on race day rearing and ready to go for a fantastic race. So I decided to research it quite a bit, and I've learned quite a lot about sleep. I'm going to split the top tips into two categories. Firstly, we have sleep tips for day-to-day training. Number one is to avoid certain substances before bedtime. In particular, I'm going to chat about two substances, the first being caffeine. Caffeine is a stimulant and it can be found in lots of lovely foods and drinks, including coffee, tea, chocolate, soft drinks, amongst a few others. Not to get too much into the science, but before we go to bed, our brain starts to release something called adenosine, which is a chemical in greater quantities, and when adenosine slots into adenosine receptors, that triggers a drowsy feeling, and as a response we feel tired, lethargic, and we want to go to bed. Great for having fantastic sleep. The problem with caffeine is that it also slots into the adenosine receptors, but rather than causing that lethargic, drowsy response to help us get to bed, it just sits there and occupies it, and as a result we feel alert for longer, and if you have caffeine before bedtime, it can make it a lot harder to get some sleep. So cutting out on caffeine in the hours leading up to bedtime is a fantastic idea to maximize the quality of your sleep. The second substance is alcohol. Alcohol is a depressant, and whilst alcohol may actually help you get to sleep in the first place, it actually wreaks havoc on the quality of your sleep, most notably your REM sleep. This is the stage of sleep where we dream, and it's associated with improving our memory, consolidating our learning, and mood regulation during the day. So if you drink alcohol, your REM sleep will likely be a little bit shot, and as a result, you just won't feel 100% on the ball the morning afterwards. Not to mention that alcohol can also make you more likely to get up in the middle of the night to go to the toilet, and yeah, you just don't want to have your sleep interrupted like that. So cutting out on alcohol prior and around bedtime is highly recommended. Number two is to go to bed and wake up at the same time every day. When it comes to sleep, it really is best to be a creature of habit, and our bodies crave regularity in our sleep and wake patterns. Going to bed and waking up at the same time each day can really make it easier for our bodies to feel drowsy at the same time each night and to wake up at the same time each morning, making our sleep cycle more stable and giving it familiarity. If you're constantly going to bed a couple of hours later here or waking up a few hours later there all the time, then you'll find that it's much harder for you to get into a steady sleep-wake cycle, and that will just make you feel a lot less alert and energetic when it comes time to wake up, and you'll likely find that you have trouble going to bed as well. If you find you struggle to stick to going to bed and waking up at the same time, then you can of course set an alarm in the morning, but what I find to be particularly helpful is to set a sleep alarm. So this is an alarm that you set for when it's time to go to bed, and if you stick to that quite rigorously for a month or so, then you'll find that it becomes a habit and second nature. Number three is to get enough sleep. Now this one isn't rocket science, but it's worth mentioning because it is so important. According to the National Health Service in England, the average adult needs between 7 to 9 hours of sleep every single night. And with this one, it's worth experimenting, if you don't already know how much sleep you need, to find out what the right amount of sleep is each night. I myself seem to function best on about 8 hours of sleep a night, and I try to go to bed at approximately 10:30 p.m. and wake up at 6:30 a.m. and I find that sticking to this allows me to get the 8 hours in. It allows me to keep regularity in my sleep-wake cycle, so tapping into tip number two, and it just allows me to feel much more refreshed and energetic in the morning, ready to get some quality running training in. Number four, and something that really surprised me when I started digging into the literature on sleep, is to keep it cool. you may be interested to hear that when it's time to go to sleep, your body actually needs to cool down its core body temperature. So it's much better and easier to fall asleep in a colder room than it is to fall asleep in a warmer room. So even though it may feel counterintuitive and a little bit uncomfortable, it's certainly worth cutting down on the thickness of your duvet and opening a window to cool down your bedroom so that you're not only able to fall asleep quickly, and you're also able to maintain sleep throughout the night with a slightly cooler body temperature. Number 5, and something that has become very hard for us humans in the modern day world, is to have darkness. Darkness triggers the release of a chemical in your brain called melatonin, which helps regulate the sleep-wake cycle. In the absence of darkness in the late evening hours, we don't produce as much melatonin, and as a result, we don't feel tired, we can't get to sleep very easily, and it just makes maintaining a regular sleep-wake cycle really hard for our bodies, which is not ideal for our health and well-being, and certainly not ideal for getting the best running training in. So we've got our smartphones, tablets, computers, television screens, we've got artificial lights all over the place. As a rule of thumb, it's recommended to limit your use of artificial light in the evening as much as possible. So you could do this by having a very dim light and spending that time doing something like reading a book or writing, or just doing something that you don't need lots of artificial light for. If you're really tempted to go on a device like your phone, then you can try a slightly nuclear approach by putting it in a locked box or just putting it in another room altogether, so that you remove that quick and easy temptation to jump on it before bedtime. Before we move on to tips around race day sleep, here are some honourable mentions. Doing exercise during the day can help you feel tired at night time, which is fantastic for us runners. Not eating a massive meal close to bedtime, because digestion can interfere with sleep. And of course, keeping your sleeping environment as noise-free and quiet as possible to help you get into a relaxed state of mind. Okay, on to the race day tips. Number 1 would be to try and follow all of the principles that I laid out in the first part of this video. They will be fantastic principles around race day to help you get into a relaxed state of mind prior to going to bed before the day of the big race. Number 2 is to get all of your race day admin done and dusted well in advance. For quite a few years, I spent the night before a race trying to get to sleep with thoughts about all of my race day admin starting in my head, and I just couldn't get to sleep. So this is things like having all your kit ready to go, traveling to the race in the morning, having all your nutrition ready. Perhaps you need to have some mandatory kit for a certain race. Maybe you need to make sure that your car has enough fuel in it to drive you to the race. All of these little bits and pieces which allow you to get to the race and run the race to the best of your ability are really important, but they're not something that you want to be thinking about and stressing about before you are trying to go to bed, because it could just make you unnecessarily worry and think about things which you want to have sorted in advance. Something that's really helped me with this one is to actually make a physical race day checklist, where I actually write down all the things I need to have organized and sorted, and then check them off physically with a pen after having actually seen that item or confirmed to myself that that thing is well and truly sorted. Having this physical bit of evidence that you can see will communicate to yourself and to your brain that you've got everything sorted, you've got all your ducks in a row prior to race day, so that you can go to bed relaxed rather than worrying about the fact that you might have forgotten a particular piece of nutrition, or that your mandatory kit is lacking a certain item, for example. Tip number 3, if you're doing a race in a foreign country with a different time zone, is to prepare yourself for the effects of jet lag. Jet lag occurs when we travel between different time zones, and it can really impact our sleep-wake cycle. As a rule of thumb, it takes our sleep-wake cycle about 1 day to adjust to every hour in difference in time zone when we are traveling across the world. As an example, I, as an English runner, if I was to do a race in New York in America, which is 5 hours behind UK time, I would try and arrive about 5 days earlier to slowly adjust to the local time zone. Of course, it's not always possible to arrive in a race location a few days before the race itself to adjust, so you can always artificially mimic the local time zone that you'll be traveling to at home by going to bed and waking up at times which reflect the local time zone. This may be tricky and difficult, but if you do it well in advance of traveling to the race location in the other time zone, it should make a bit of a difference when you arrive and get ready to run the race on race day. Next is to visualize something familiar before you go to bed. If you're like me and you have a tendency to have a mind that races around thinking about loads of different things before you go to bed, a really useful exercise is to visualize something that you are familiar with, and that can really get your mind off of just thinking about loads of random thoughts which are not going to help you out in any way, shape or form. Examples of what to visualize include a lovely walk that you're familiar with, a familiar location including your house, or even a fictional location that you're familiar with, for example in a TV show or in a film. With this one, make sure that whatever you're visualizing is something that you are familiar with, because if you are visualizing something novel, that can be too engaging, stimulating and interesting for your brain, and it can actually be counterproductive. So imagining the race itself, which will arguably be a novel situation for you, won't be the best thing to be visualizing about as you're trying to get to bed before race day. The next tip is for those booking accommodation prior to a race, research your pre-race day accommodation before booking it. When I ran the Mozart 100, which is an ultra marathon in Austria, I booked a hotel online without researching what the area is like. Now don't get me wrong, the hotel was absolutely lovely, but outside my room was a massive courtyard of large balconies, which the tourists who had been out all night drinking, having a good time, decided to use as a party ground to extend their night. And they were so loud all night. And I actually ended up only getting about 4 hours sleep because they were just so loud. And that wasn't great for me on race day, and it really stressed me out as I was trying to get to sleep. Had I spent a little bit of time researching the hotel in a bit more detail, I would have found that there were a few comments online about this rowdy, loud behavior from tourists outside the hotel. So make sure that you research wherever it is you're going to be staying prior to race day if you're booking accommodation, as you really don't want to end up in a situation like I was in prior to my ultramarathon in Austria. There you have it. There were just a few tips that I've gathered over the years for better day-to-day training and for having better sleep prior to race day. If you're interested in finding more out about sleep and its importance and tips for how to get better sleep, I'd highly recommend the book Why We Sleep by British scientist Matthew Walker. It's a really fantastic, well-written book which gives you lots of great information on sleep, and it's not too technical, it's not too scientific. Great for the average reader like myself. Have you got any other tips for having better sleep when it comes to running, getting better training and having better race days? Let me know in the comments down below. Thanks very much for watching. I've been Craig and I'll see you in the next one. Happy running.